There's a room in this city that men do not walk into twice. Steel walls. One door. A single bulb hanging low enough that it turns every face beneath it into something the person barely recognizes as their own. Tonight, a woman is sitting in the only chair in that room, and for the first time in her life, she is certain she is about to die. Her name is Munsa Sani. 8 months ago, she took a job caring for a little girl who did not want to be cared for, inside a house that belonged to a man the whole city was too afraid to say out loud. She did not know, the day she said yes to that job, that it would end here. She did not know that in the next 60 seconds, the coldest man in this city was going to walk through that door, see her sitting in that chair, and feel something break inside him that had stayed frozen on purpose for 3 straight years. Every person who has ever called Gene Park a man without a heart is about to be proven wrong, just not in the way any of them are expecting. Before we go back to how all of this began, I want to say something to you quietly, the way you would say it to someone sitting right next to you. If this is your first time here, welcome to Afro Korean Stories Empire. This is a channel built for exactly this kind of story. The kind where love finds you in the very last place you were looking for it, and stays even after everything else falls apart. If that is the kind of story that stays with you long after the video ends, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Now, let's go back. Let's go back 8 months, to the first morning Munsa Sani ever stood outside that gate, with no idea what, or who, was waiting for her on the other side. The house behind that gate did not look like a home. It looked like a fortress that had learned, over many years, how to disguise itself as one. Stone walls high enough that she could not see over them, even standing on her toes. Cameras tucked into the ivy, so carefully hidden that she only found them because she was looking. A guard at the gate who did not smile, did not ask her name, only looked at a tablet in his hand, and then looked at her twice, like he was comparing her to a photograph he already had. She had read the listing 3 times before she called the agency. Nanny required. Full-time. Live and preferred. Compensation well above market rate. No mention of who the family was. The agency woman had lowered her voice on the phone, the way people do when they're about to say something they're not supposed to say, and told her the name of the man behind the gate. Munsa had heard that name before. Everyone in this city had heard that name before. She thought about her grandmother's eyes, clouding more every month as surgery kept getting pushed back for lack of money. She thought about her brother's school fees, due in a lump sum no ordinary salary could cover in time. She thought about the promise she made at her mother's grave, the one about taking care of the family her mother left behind, and she walked through the gate anyway. Fear, she had learned a long time ago, is not a reason to turn around. It is only a reason to pay closer attention. Inside, the house was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Marble floors that swallowed sound. A staircase wide enough for 4 people to climb side by side, and somehow built to make a person feel small anyway. She was led to a study at the end of a hallway lined with photographs that stopped, she noticed 3 years ago. Every picture after that point in the house was missing one particular woman. Gene Park did not stand when she entered. He was seated behind a desk with nothing on it except a single closed folder, and he watched her walk in with the kind of attention most people reserve for reading a contract, not a person. His eyes were dark and very still. She had the strange, immediate sense that he had already decided several things about her before she said a word, and that nothing she said in the next 10 minutes was going to change most of them. He asked her 3 questions. Why nannying? Why this house, when she surely knew what this house was? What she would do if his daughter refused, on principle, to like her. She answered honestly. Because it pays what she needs. Because she has buried harder things than a reputation. Because a child does not have to like her on the first day. Liking comes later, if it comes at all, and it is never the part that matters most. Something in his face did not soften exactly, but stopped moving for a second, the way still water stops moving when something has passed beneath the surface of it. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen, and something behind his eyes went flat, the particular flatness of a man closing a door in his own mind before he closes it in the room. He answered without excusing himself, without lowering his voice, as though her presence had already stopped matching to whatever was about to happen. He said 4 words. That is all. He said them the way another man might read out a grocery list, in a voice with no weight in it at all, no anger, no heat, nothing for her to hold on to and call human. Then he set the phone down on the desk, so precisely parallel to its edge that it looked measured, and looked back at her, as if nothing had happened. "You start Monday," he said. "Yuna does not know you are coming. She will test you. Everyone does." Munsa did not ask who had been on the phone. She did not ask what those 4 words meant, though some old, careful part of her already understood the shape of it, the same way you understand the shape of a shadow, without needing to see what casts it. She would learn later, from a conversation she was not supposed to overhear, that somewhere across the city, in the hour after that call, a man named Chul stopped being spoken of in the present tense. She did not flinch in the study. She only nodded once, and said she would be there Monday morning, and something in the way she said it, steady, unhurried, made Gene Park look at her for 1 second longer than the interview required. He did not know yet what that second would cost him. Yuna Park did not come downstairs to meet her. Munsa found her on the 3rd morning, not the 1st, sitting cross-legged on the floor of a room clearly built for a child who was never really allowed to be careless in it. Toys still in their boxes. A bed made with hospital corners. A 7-year-old girl with her mother's dimple and her father's stillness, glaring up at a stranger with the particular fury of someone who has already said goodbye to 6 people and refuses to learn a 7th name. "You'll leave too," Eunice said. Not a question. A fact she had already filed away. "Probably," Munsa said, sitting down on the floor across from her, not too close. "Everybody leaves eventually. Even the people who stay for a long, long time. That's not really the question." Yuna narrowed her eyes. "Then, what's the question?" "The question is what you do with the time before that." Munsa picked up one of the still box toys, turned it over in her hands, set it back down without opening it. "I'm not going anywhere today, so we might as well figure out what today looks like." She did not try to hug the girl. She did not perform warmth the way the last one had, the one who had lasted 9 days and left in tears. She simply sat on the floor of that too-tidy room at a child's eye level, and waited the way she had learned to wait years ago in a hospital corridor, without needing anything back for it yet. It took 11 days for Yuna to laugh in front of her. It took 19 for Yuna to fall asleep in her lap during a movie, and for Munsa to sit very still afterward, arm gone numb, unwilling to move a single muscle that might wake her. Gene Park found them like that on the 19th night, in the doorway of the living room he almost never used, and stood there long enough that Munsa noticed him before he said anything. He did not say anything. He only looked at his daughter, asleep and unguarded in a way he had not seen in longer than he wanted to count. And then he looked at Munsa, and something crossed his face that she could not yet name, because she had not yet seen it enough times to know its shape. Later, she would learn to call a hope. That night, she only knew it looked like a man remembering something he had decided a long time ago to stop letting himself want. The weeks that followed built themselves into a shape Munsa had not expected. Mornings were school runs and battles over which socks were acceptable. Afternoons were homework, and twice a week, a video call to Kamasi that Munsa took alone in the garden, phone held close to her ear like something she was protecting. Her grandmother's voice always came through a little too loud, the way older phones make older ears speak. "Her eyes are getting worse," her brother would say quietly in the background, before their grandmother waved him off the call. Munsa would smile through it every time, tell them the job was good, the pay was good, do not worry about her, and then hang up and sit alone in the garden for a minute longer than she needed to, doing the quiet arithmetic of how many more months this job would take to fix what needed fixing at home. Miho caught her at it once, arms crossed, leaning against the garden stone wall the way he leaned against every wall in that house, like a man permanently on duty even when he was only pretending to relax. "You do that every Wednesday," he said. Not a question either. Everyone in this house, Munsa was starting to notice, spoke the same way. Statements, not questions. As if questions gave too much room for a lie to slip through. "I like Wednesdays," she said. "You like your grandmother," Miho corrected, and something almost like a smile moved through his face, there and gone. "There's a difference. Don't let the boss hear you being sentimental. He'll think it's contagious." "Is it?" Miho did not answer that one. He only pushed off the wall and walked back inside, and Munsa sat with the shape of the question for a while after he had gone, turning it over the way she turned over most things lately, slowly, and a little bit afraid of what she might find if she looked too closely. Gene Park, she was learning, said almost nothing directly to her, and remembered everything anyway. She mentioned once, in passing, over a dinner Una refused to eat, that she took her tea with just a little condensed milk, the way her grandmother made it. 3 days later, there was a tin of it in the kitchen cupboard that had not been there before, unlabeled, unexplained, exactly where her hand would find it without needing to search. She did not say anything about it. Neither did he. But she started noticing that she was noticing him, and that was new, and it frightened her more than anything that had happened in that house so far, including the 4 words she still had not asked him to explain. He was not the only one watching the house change shape. 3 streets away, in a car with its engine off and its windows cracked, Daniel Co. watched a woman he had never met carry his sister's daughter on her hip through the front garden, laughing at something the child had said, and felt something in his chest curl into a fist. He had known Jean would rebuild. He had not expected him to replace. "She's just the nanny," the man beside him said. Daniel did not answer right away. He watched Munsa set Una down, watched Una reach up and take her hand anyway, watched the porch light come on early because someone inside had noticed the sky going dark and thought to turn it on before anyone had to ask. "My sister asked him," Daniel said finally, very quietly, one thing. When she knew she wasn't going to make it, she asked him to remember her. Not to move on. Remember her. He did not say the rest of what he was thinking. He did not need to, not yet. He only watched the light in the window a moment longer, and then he told the driver to go, and somewhere behind his ribs, grief finished the slow work of turning itself into something with teeth. 2 months into Munsa's time in that house, Jean Park learned that a man he had trusted for 11 years had been stealing. Not from him. That would have been almost forgivable in the strange arithmetic of his world, a debt to be repaid, a lesson to be delivered and closed. Tay had been stealing from the medical fund set aside for a low-ranking soldier's daughter, a 9-year-old girl fighting a cancer that did not care whose organization her father worked for. Small amounts, skimmed carefully over a year, never quite enough to be noticed unless someone was looking hard enough to notice, and Jean Park always looked hard enough. He did not raise his voice when he called Tay into the back office that evening. He never did. There was one object on the table between them when Miho closed the door and left the 2 of them alone, the way he always did when Jean asked him to. Munsa did not see what it was. No one outside that room ever learned exactly what it was. What the house learned, the way houses like that always learn things without being told, was that Jean Park asked Tay one question and gave him the length of one held breath to answer it honestly. Telit. The room was quiet again within a few minutes. Not silent. Quiet. The particular quiet of something being handled without any wasted motion, without a single voice ever rising above a conversational register. When the door opened again, Miho went in without being asked, the way a man goes in to clean up after a decision that has already been made and does not need to be discussed twice. Tay did not come to work the next day, or the day after. When his name came up, weeks later, in a conversation Jean did not know Munsa overheard, it was mentioned the way people mention weather that has already passed. Nobody asked where he had gone. Everyone in that organization already understood the shape of the answer, the same way Munsa was starting to. That was the range of him, she thought later, lying awake in her room down the hall from his. He would remember exactly how she liked her tea, and he would sit across a table from a man he had known for 11 years, and in that man's place in his life, without changing his tone of voice once. Both of those things were true. She was starting to understand that they were going to have to both be true at the same time for as long as she stayed in that house. She could not sleep that night. She told herself it was the time difference messing with her, the residue of a bad connection on her last call home. Anything except the truth, which was that some part of her had heard the quiet closing of that office door 2 floors down and had not been able to settle since. She went down to the kitchen a little after 2 in the morning for tea, moving through the dark house on feet that had learned, without her deciding to teach them, exactly which floorboards to avoid. She was humming before she realized she was doing it, an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing in Chui, low and half-remembered, the kind of song that comes out of a person when they're trying to comfort themselves and do not have the words to ask for comfort directly. She did not hear him come in. She only felt the kitchen go quieter somehow, the particular quiet of another person choosing not to announce themselves. Jean Park stood in the doorway in a plain white shirt with the sleeves still buttoned, looking like a man who had not yet decided whether he was allowed to be in this room with her. She did not ask him what happened in that office. She already knew enough not to need the details, and some old instinct in her understood that asking would only build a wall neither of them wanted built tonight. She poured a second cup instead, without making it a question, and set it down on the counter between them, close enough to reach, far enough to leave the choice entirely his. He picked it up. Neither of them spoke for a while. The tea steamed between them in the dark kitchen, and somewhere upstairs Yuna was asleep with the door cracked the way she liked it now, and the house held its breath around the two of them the way houses do sometimes, when something is about to shift and has not shifted yet. "You didn't ask," he said finally. His voice was lower than she had heard it before, worn down at the edges. "You didn't offer," she said. "I figured that meant something." He looked at her then, really looked, the way he had looked at her exactly once before, in the study on the day they met, except this time the look lasted longer than a single second, long enough that she felt it settle somewhere under her ribs and stay there. "Most people are afraid of me," he said. It was not a question either. Nobody in that house asked questions. "You're not." "I didn't say that," Munsa said quietly. "I said I'm not leaving tonight." "That's not the same thing." Something that was almost a smile moved through his face, there and gone, the way it always was with him. A door opened 1 inch and closed again before anyone could see all the way through it. He finished the tea. He set the cup down, so precisely parallel to the edge of the counter that she almost laughed. Then he said good night and went back upstairs, and Munsa stood alone in the kitchen for a long time afterward, one hand pressed flat against her own chest, feeling something there that she had spent 3 years making sure nobody would ever find again. I want to pause here for a moment, because I think some of you already know exactly what this feeling is. If you are still with me at this point in the story, I want to thank you, quietly, the way you thank someone who has trusted you with their evening. This is usually the part where I ask you to do something, and I will, but I want you to know it is not for a number on a screen. It is because stories like this one only keep finding the people who need them when the people who feel them pass them on. So if this is doing to you even a fraction of what it is doing to me telling it, tap that subscribe button, send this to the one person you know who still believes in a love like this, your sister, your best friend, the one who never stopped hoping. And if you're feeling everything I think you're feeling right now, type I am loving in the comments below, so I know you're still here with me. Now let's go back, because what happens next changes everything you think you understood about how this story started. 3 nights later, unable to sleep again, Munsa found herself in the hallway outside Jin's study long after midnight, drawn there by a light under the door she had not expected to see this late. The door was open a crack. She was not trying to look. She only looked the way anyone looks when a door is open and a light is on and a house has taught them, slowly, to notice everything. He was sitting at his desk with a single piece of paper in his hands, worn soft at the folds from being opened many times. She recognized, from the photographs in the hallway, the handwriting before she recognized anything else. It belonged to the woman who used to be in all those pictures. She learned later, because he told her himself, weeks after that night, what the letter said. Hannah had written it in her last months, when she already knew how little time was left, and in it she had described, in careful, specific detail, the kind of person she hoped would one day help raise their daughter if she could not. Someone patient before anything else. Someone who did not perform kindness, only lived inside it. Someone who understood grief well enough to sit beside a child's silence without trying to fill it. Munsa did not know, standing in that hallway, that the woman writing those words 3 years ago had described her, almost exactly, without ever meeting her, without ever knowing her name. She only knew that something in her chest recognized something in his, standing there in the dark, two people who had both spent years building very careful walls around the same soft, breakable thing. And somewhere else in the story, a detail she did not yet understand the weight of was recontextualizing itself too. The man on the other end of that phone call, the one who stopped being spoken of the week she arrived, had not lost his place over a simple debt the way she had assumed. Chul had been feeding information about the house, its routines, its weaknesses, its new hire, to a man watching from a car 3 streets away. Gene Park had not simply been protecting his business that day. He had been protecting the house she was about to walk into, before she had ever set foot inside it. After that night, something between them stopped pretending to be nothing. It did not become loud. It became, instead, 100 small things neither of them named out loud. He started coming home earlier. She started saving him a plate without being asked. Yuna, who missed very little, began drawing pictures of the three of them together and taping them to the refrigerator and watching both adults' faces very closely whenever they noticed. Munsa still called Kamasi every Wednesday. She still did the quiet arithmetic of months and money in her head. But she noticed some weeks that she forgot to do it until the call was already over because the rest of her day had been full in a way it had not been full in a long time. Daniel noticed too. He always noticed. He watched the porch light come on earlier every week, watched a routine settle into the house that felt less like grief and more like living. He learned, the way he learned most things, by watching quietly and asking almost nothing, that Munsa walked to a bench at the edge of the small park 2 blocks from the house every Sunday afternoon, alone, to place a call home at exactly the right hour to catch her grandmother awake on the other side of the world. Jean had noticed the same thing weeks earlier, through a door left cracked one afternoon, while Munsa explained the routine gently to Yuna, and he had said nothing about it. He simply never asked her to change the day, never offered to send anyone with her, understanding without being told that the 1 hour of her week that belonged only to her was not his to interrupt. He filed it away instead, the way he filed away everything about her. The bench, the hour, the Sunday walk that had become, without either of them naming it, one more small thing he quietly made sure to protect. He did not know yet how much that small, careful act of noticing was about to matter. The first real scare came on a Thursday, and it ended, everyone believed, the same night it began. A car followed the school pickup route for 2 days before Miho's people caught the plate. A man was found watching the house from a parked car and questioned, and the questioning revealed enough for Miho to shut the immediate threat down hard and fast. Extra men were posted. The car was gone by morning. Jean came home that night and told Munsa in a low, careful voice that it was handled, that she and Yuna were safe, and for the first time since she had walked through that gate 8 months earlier, Munsa let herself believe that the worst of this world might actually be behind them. They stood in the kitchen that night, the same kitchen, the same 2 cups, and something in the air between them finally felt like it was about to become a sentence instead of a silence. Munsa, he said, and the way he said her name was different than she had ever heard it, careful, like he was setting something down exactly where he meant it to go. She felt the word coming before he said it. She felt, for 1 full second, what it might be like to let it land. And then, for the first time in 3 years, she felt afraid in a way that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with herself. She thought of a hospital corridor. She thought of a man who had held her through the worst night of her life and then quietly stopped calling 2 months later, because loving her had started to cost him something he was not willing to keep paying. She thought, standing in that warm kitchen with a good man finally about to say something true, that she did not know if she could survive being left again, not by a stranger this time, but by someone who mattered. "I have to tell you something," she said instead, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I think I need to give my notice." The relief in that kitchen did not just lift. It fell, all at once, through a floor neither of them had known was this thin. Jean did not argue. He only nodded once, the way he nodded at things he could not control, and said he understood, and neither of those things were true, and both of them knew it. She never got the chance to leave. 2 days later, on a Sunday, Munsa walked to her bench at the edge of the park the way she always did, phone in hand, ready to hear her grandmother's voice come through too loud the way it always did. She never made the call. A car she did not recognize slowed beside her, and 2 men who did not need to say much got out of it, and by the time anyone in that house realized she was 30 minutes late for a routine she had never once been late for, she was already gone. Jean Park did not shout when Miho told him. He went very still instead, the stillness the whole city had learned to fear, except this time there was nothing calm underneath it. This time the stillness was a dam, and everyone in that room could see it straining. "The park," he said. "The bench. She goes every Sunday. She thinks no one knows." Miho stared at him. "How do you know that?" Jean did not answer. There was no time to explain months of quiet noticing to a man who needed him moving, not talking, and some part of him understood, standing in that hallway, that every small, unremarkable thing he had paid attention to about her had just become the only map he had. What followed was not a clean rescue. Every path in front of him caused something. go through his own organization, and word would move faster than he could, straight to Daniel, straight to whatever room she was already sitting in. Go alone, and he risked everything the city had ever feared about him on one woman, in a way that would tell every rival watching exactly where his weakness lived now. Wait, and lose whatever window still existed. He chose the version of himself his father spent a lifetime warning him against. He went himself. What he did to get a location out of the one man in Daniel's crew, still willing to talk, is not something that needs repeating here. It is enough to say this. The same stillness that had once ended a conversation across an office desk without ever raising his voice was the exact same stillness that got a frightened man talking in a matter of minutes that night. The hands capable of unimaginable coldness were, in that hour, the only hands fast enough to save her. He was not proud of it. He would never be proud of it. But driving toward the warehouse district with an address finally in hand, Gene Park understood, for the first time in 3 years, exactly what he was still capable of feeling and exactly what he was still capable of doing to protect it. This is the room from the beginning. Steel walls. One door. A single bulb hanging low enough to turn a face into something barely recognizable as itself. Munsa sat in the only chair in that room, wristbound, certain for the first time in her life that she was about to die, and thinking in the strange sideways way the mind moves under real fear. Not of her grandmother, not even of Yuna, but of the kitchen at 2 in the morning and a man who had never once told her how he felt and had somehow told her everything anyway. Daniel Co. stood in front of her, tie loosened, hands restless, grief wearing the costume of certainty. He's forgetting her, he said, and Munsa understood he was not really talking to her at all. He was talking to his sister who could not hear him anymore, using Munsa as the only audience left. I'm not going to let him forget her. He hasn't forgotten her, Munsa said quietly. Her voice did not shake, though everything else in her wanted to. I've seen her letter. I know what she asked him to do. You're not protecting her memory. You're punishing him for surviving it. Daniel's hand came up before he had fully decided to raise it. The door opened before it landed. Gene Park walked into that room the way he walked into every room in his life, without hurrying, without raising his voice, except this time something in his stillness had finally completely broken, and every man in that warehouse who had ever believed they understood the limits of Gene Park's control learned, in the next several seconds, exactly how wrong they had been. He did not go to Daniel first. He went to her. He knelt in front of that chair, hands shaking as he worked the bindings loose, and said her name the way he had said it in the kitchen that last night, careful, exact, like something he had been afraid to say too many times and was no longer willing to hold back even once more. I should have said it that night, he told her, low enough that it belonged only to the two of them, even in a room full of armed men who would tell this story for years without ever repeating this part. I'm done being careful with this. I love you. I have loved you since a kitchen at 2 in the morning, and I'm not letting you leave this room without knowing that. Munsa, wrists finally free, hands still shaking, reached up and held his face in both of her palms, the coldest man in the city, undone, kneeling in front of her in the exact room where he had built his reputation on never once being undone. I know, she said. I knew before you did. Behind them, Daniel Co. did not fight. Something in him had already broken the moment he raised his hand and the door opened anyway. The moment he understood, all at once, that his sister's memory had never needed defending from this, only from his own refusal to let her be at peace. He went quietly. Grief, finally, ran out of teeth. What came after took months to build and a lifetime to keep. The first morning that mattered most was a small one. 6 weeks later, Munsa woke before dawn out of habit, and found Jean already awake beside her, watching her the way he used to watch rooms for threats, except now there was nothing careful about it all. He made her tea with a little condensed milk, unlabeled tin, exactly where her hand would find it. Neither of them said much. They did not need to. It was the first morning in 3 years that his house had woken up quiet in a way that felt like peace instead of grief, and they sat with it together, just the two of them, before Yuna's footsteps came thundering down the hall, and the day officially began. 2 months after that, Munsa's phone rang on an ordinary Tuesday, and it was her grandmother, crying, from inside a hospital room in Kumasi, describing a ceiling she could see clearly for the first time in 4 years. The surgery had been scheduled and paid for in full weeks earlier, quietly, by a man who had heard her mention the cost exactly once, 8 months before, and had never brought it up again until it was already done. Her brother's school fees arrived the same way, paid a full year in advance, with a note that said only, "Your sister works hard enough. Let her rest." The proposal came on a warm evening in the garden Hannah had never finished planting. The one Munsa had spent a year quietly bringing back to life without ever being asked to. Jean knelt in the dirt in his good suit and did not care. And when Munsa reached in her bag out of nervous habit, her fingers found the same strip of Kent cloth she had carried, folded small, in the bottom of her suitcase since the day she left Kamasi, saved without knowing what she was saving it for. She understood, looking down at him, exactly what she had been saving it for all along. The wedding happened in that same garden the following spring. Korean elders bowed with quiet formality beside Ghanaian nannies who could not stop dancing. Yuna, 8 years old by then, wore a small circlet of Kent fabric stitched into the hem of her dress, walking the aisle before the bride with a seriousness that broke into open, unguarded delight the moment she reached her father's side. Years later, on an ordinary Sunday morning, a kitchen held 2 languages at once, Korean from a father teaching his son to count, Chui from a mother singing half-remembered words to a daughter who did not yet know she would grow up singing them too. Yuna, 17 now, leaned in the doorway, rolling her eyes at both of them with the specific fondness of a teenager who will deny, for the rest of her life, that she ever found her family this soft. Jean looked up from the stove and caught Munsa's eye across the room, and in that one look was a warehouse room, and a kitchen at 2 in the morning, and a bench at the edge of a park, and every quiet thing he had ever noticed about her without saying so. She smiled at him, the smile with the small gap in her teeth that only ever showed up when it was real. He smiled back. It was not a rare thing anymore. That is the story of a man the world called a monster, and a woman who was never afraid of him, only of what it might cost her to be loved by him. It is the story of a little girl who tested every person who walked through that door until one of them finally stayed. It is the story of a house that learned, slowly, how to stop being a fortress and start being a home again. If this story made you feel something tonight, I would love to know what it was. Tell me in the comments below what stayed with you most. Was it the kitchen at 2 in the morning? Was it the letter in the drawer, written by a woman who somehow knew exactly who her daughter would need before that person had ever walked through the door? Was it the way he said her name in that room? Careful, exact, like it was the only word he had left. Tell me who this story made you think of. Someone you loved carefully. Someone who loved you the same way, in small things and remembered details, in a cup of tea made exactly the way you like it, without ever needing to be asked twice. Because that is what this channel has always believed, and what I hope you carry with you after tonight. Love, the real kind, the kind that survives everything it is asked to survive, has never once been in a hurry. It was only ever worth the wait.